Welcome to the Crimson Engine. My name is Rubidium. Your big break is probably not happening, and that's a good thing. Today we are going to talk about the myth of the big break in filmmaking, the film that long shot gets into Cannes, wins the award, gets picked up by the major studio. This idea that absolutely happens, but statistically happens so seldom that to plan your career around it is sort of like planning your career around winning the lottery. And instead, it is a much better idea to have a real plan that doesn't depend on outside factors, to create films that you're proud of, build an audience and a community that supports you, and have basically slow, sustainable, achievable growth over a long period of time rather than planning to have one huge spike and make your name through coincidence and fortune alone. Let's dive in. So the big break is real. That is what's so crazy about it. And I think most filmmakers would be lying if they told you that they hadn't dreamed of winning the big award or having the script that found its way to the right producer, to the studio head, that ended up getting made and making them overnight success. You know, everyone talks about the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, Reservoir Dogs, Primer, Whiplash, because each new generation has one of these stories, and they attract so many people into the craft and the art and the business of filmmaking that they become part of the mythology. They become what motivates us to go through all the craziness and the sleepless nights, the empty bank accounts, the blank page anxiety of filmmaking. Because at the end we see this, the mansion in the Hollywood Hills with the beautiful wife or husband, the room full of celebrities clapping you as you accept your Oscar. This is the dream that sustains a lot of us through this period of time. And I have no problem with that. I myself have been very susceptible to that myth. But as I've done this job now for 25 something years, I've realized that that may be what gets you off the couch or gets you out of bed at 3 a.m. to shoot that sunrise. But realistically, you're going to need another plan if you want to stay in this business and actually find success. Because while those big breaks do happen, they are so much rarer than we think they are, because we're able to look at the Oscars and see, 4 or 5 people all nominated and they all had big breaks of some description. We feel as though a big break is something that happens and happens a lot. It actually happens it happens so seldom that the exception becomes the rule. Realistically, it only happens once or twice a year to, a writer-director or someone who gets catapulted into the spotlight from nothing. Like Anora, that guy had been scrapping around for years, had some small success, and then suddenly he's winning all the awards, he's getting all of the deals. I looked it up online. In the US alone, 500 people a year win over $1 million in lotteries or some other games. So that's more than one a day winning the lottery. Whereas in filmmaking, it's, one a year or one every couple of years. So if your plan is to win an Oscar for your independent short film and then win an Oscar for your first feature film, you're better off playing the lottery and spending that money buying the Oscar like the Weinsteins did. But in all seriousness, I don't think we appreciate. We all think that we're going to be the exception. And like I said, if that gets you out of bed, that's a great thing to believe. But you also want it to be a shortcut on a plan you've already made that is going to get you there anyway. Why do big breaks suck? Because by their very nature, a big break is something that someone else gives you. It's the script reader or the studio head or the jury at Cannes that say, this person's film is better than all the rest, even though it had very few of the resources. The idea that you're going to win a major award with a very low budget, a cast and crew that aren't nearly as accomplished and professional and established as other people's films, a Hollywood movie. The juries at these big festivals often throw in a winner from a complete indie film just to make it feel like it's still fair. It's not because that movie is better than the others, or that they wouldn't even know about an indie film unless they had this agenda to promote indie movies. You just can't bet your life and your future on the vagaries of someone else's decision, because that means you're constantly living in hope that someone else will take that chance on you. It is far better to do what we know works on a slightly larger scale each time, to get bigger and bigger and bigger as you go, to build a career. And I'm going to talk about how I think that should be done, without relying on someone else's idea. It's like we talked about in the Stoicism episode. When you have an internal locus of control, like when all of the things that you're working on are things inside you, inside what you can do, you're far more empowered, you're far more likely to stick with it over time than you are when you're sending things out into the universe and hoping against hope that someone out there makes a decision to your advantage. Not that they won't, and not that you can't change those odds by making the best film that you can, one that's different than everything else and uses the structures that we talked about. But suddenly now you're in a position where you're asking for a favor. You're asking for someone else to do something for you. And that is a recipe for burnout, for disillusionment, for becoming cynical, because more likely than not, those things won't happen. Especially when we're living in a time when you're going from a place where in the late 90s you had hundreds of 400 feature films made globally, 400 in the whole world. Sundance and South by and Cannes were having 100 submissions, 200 submissions. Now there are infinite, hundreds of thousands of features made a year. That would probably just be in the US, probably just in Hollywood, in Southern California. So your chances of winning now, because the means of production are so much more accessible, are so much lower than they were back when Ed Burns made The Brothers McMullen. He was competing against other big movies, but he was able to save up enough money and hire a film camera over the weekends, shoot it in his kitchen, and he was able to produce a film that, looking back on it now, pretty amateurish, like wouldn't even do well on YouTube. But he was able to make a film that kind of had its own charm because it wasn't a big budget Hollywood movie. And he was able to, get it to win all these awards. He then got cast in a bunch of films. He had this huge, he had a long career as both an actor and a director because he was able to achieve something that very few people could at the time, which was make a film. Now everybody can make a film. So there is so much more things in the air. And there's so much more volume coming out, and it's much, much harder to differentiate yourself. When I was starting out in Australia in the 2005 area, 20 years ago, everyone was vying for government funding. The Australian government, the Victorian government, the state where I lived, was giving taxpayer money to independent filmmakers to make their films. They gave out like $500,000 to a couple people every year. And so people were spending a massive amount of time writing scripts, trying to get funding, trying to put teams together, filling out these long government bureaucratic paperwork forms, that things like, what's your motivation, what's your history, what's your education. They're spending months on these applications when ultimately the people who approve the funding were just in this sort of merry-go-round where there was about a dozen people, and the 3 or 4 of them were in the funding group, and they would give their funding to the others, and then they would make their films. Then those people would get promoted and get put into the deciders, and they would give the funding to the people that gave them the funding the years before. So it was about a dozen or 20 people that were just on this merry-go-round. Basically, maybe it's still happening. I haven't lived in Australia for 15 years, but my understanding was that it was essentially a small group of insiders just, spending taxpayer money on films that they then made and no one ever got to see because, they're probably terrible and never even got distribution. It would have been so much better use of people's time to actually go out and make the films themselves with the tools that they had. And at the time, that was, on 16mm film or on short ends of 35 or, any number of, on digital video that looked terrible. There was all sorts of ways of making that happen. But it would have been that much better than trying to apply for government funding where the decision makers are not only out of your control, but have their own agenda and are really just, giving the money to themselves or their friends in return for getting the money later. It's just a crazy thing to put the future in the hands of a total stranger who has their own interests at stake. When I was launching Devil's Fortune, I saw another movie that was in the top 20 new releases on Amazon that was made by a company in Florida called DBS Films. I looked into it, I reached out to the guy, and they have a really amazing model that I think more people should know about. They are making horror movies, very low budget. They're making 2 or 3 a year, and they're absolutely crushing it because they understand how to build a community and market their films. I'm looking at their website. They have made The Invited, The Unseen, The Haunting of Hitler House, Into the Forest, The Haunting of the Suicide House, Haunting of the Morgan Estate, Devil in the Room, The Girl in Cabin 13, The Haunting in the Murdering House, The Forest of Death, and The Horror in the Forest. All in the last 2 or 3 years. And there is nothing that I believe that they're doing technically in their films that most filmmakers couldn't do. They are using prosumer equipment. They are lighting very simply. They're using simple locations. They're using, not using name actors. And yet they now have a whole library of films generating income and funding the next movie. They're doing it, I believe, through really smart marketing. They have a lot of experience in Facebook ads, and they're pushing they're finding their audience through Facebook and Instagram and maybe some Google, and they're basically running a really smart social media campaign. They have almost 500,000 followers on TikTok, they have a Discord server where they get everyone together and watch films. They really have done an awesome job of building a community. I'm going to actually check in with the guy again after a couple of years and get an update on how he's been able to do this, because they are not waiting for someone to discover what they're doing. They're not even trying to sit down and do endless drafts to write, the next great film. What they're doing is getting out there and making movies, one. And the second thing is that they're working out how to build and connect with an audience, how to build a brand. And now they have an entire library of films that they've made, like a dozen of them, that are now generating income that can both support them and finance the new films and finance the promotion of the new films. And I think it's a really positive example of not waiting for the big break, not waiting for someone else to validate your idea or your concept of what a film should be. They're not doing it arbitrarily. They're not just saying, hey, this is my way or the highway. They are really connected with the community, and they're also really smart in the way that they test the titles of their films, the posters of their movies, the way that they market and communicate through them by doing different iterations of Facebook ads, I think, so that they're finding the message that connects with the audience and through trial and error, and then going ahead and pushing that out into the world and getting a really good result. I chose to build a community around my films through teaching people about how I made them. That's why I have this YouTube channel. It gets something in the order of 1 million views a year, but they're not to the general public. They're the people that are really into the films that I make, the way that I make my films, the cameras that I use. And I've been able to have that community as a way to support and promote the projects that I work on. And that's not to say that everyone needs to make a YouTube where you teach, lighting and do camera reviews. That's worked for me. That's worked for other people. You need to find the thing it is that you can help other people like you right now. And we're all, as filmmakers, solving problems continuously. That's the job. We're all up against challenges, and then we find our way through those challenges and be able to, better equipped to meet the next one. My question is, why keep that a secret? Why keep the problems that you're solving to yourself? Why not share them, whatever they are, whether they're, how to direct actors, how to find locations, how to work creatively, how to tell stories. Why not use the way that we're making our films as a way to help a similar audience and connect with those people, so that when we do make our films, people want to see them? And that has been my big epiphany, and that's what I recommend to other people, that just making a movie every 2 or 3 or 4 years, you're pushed out of people's consciousness by the fact that there are so many other advertising messages coming in now. We see like thousands of advertising messages a day. Everyone else is just spending billions of dollars to get people's attention. And if you're not somehow in other people's minds or brains, in front of people's eyes, you're being pushed out by everything else. So I think building a community is about finding a way to help others, finding something of value to offer them as you make the films that you want to make. That might be anything that you're comfortable sharing. Some people want to make short films every month, or some people want to make shorts. Some people make lots of YouTube videos and show how they did it. Whatever your community is, whatever your way of contributing to the world is, my advice is have that be the thing that you're using to slowly grow, and not betting on and hoping against hope that that one thing that you do explodes, because maybe it will, but it's far better to not bet the house on that, to have another way forward that you can see, oh, in a certain amount of time, this will take me to where I want to go anyway. Because there's a great quote that, people vastly overestimate what they can accomplish in a single year, but underestimate what they can accomplish in 3 years or 5 years. If you set yourself a longer time frame to achieve, supporting yourself as a filmmaker before you make your first feature film, before you're able to make a big budget feature film, if you set your timeline longer and have a plan for actually achieving that, then it's far more sustainable and far more likely to be successful than it is to bet everything on that one big film, that, getting into that festival, getting that funding, getting that, meeting that rich person who writes you that big check. I've said this before in these podcasts, but I really don't think there's a better time in history to have been a storyteller, and certainly not a better time in the last 100 years to be a filmmaker, because we have so many resources, both material and informational and technological, to be able to produce a film that shows what we can do. And we've never been able to reach an audience easier. We've never been able to reach an audience cheaper, to create a community around what it is that we do. And so, we can look back on the 70s and the 80s and say, wow, if you had $200,000, you could make a movie and almost certainly get into a major festival, probably win and get in front of a studio system. That may have been true, but $200,000 and $250,000, $300,000 in the 80s was the equivalent of $600,000 now. Today, we're able to make a film with a cell phone and cheap lighting. I found this the other day on Amazon. It's like an inflatable tube light, and it's $30 or something, right? Like, this would have made a Hollywood cinematographer in the 80s, like, smash his lenses, because it's so cheap, it's so accessible, it's almost disposable. That's how cheap things are now. So there's no excuse for not being able to get good gear, to know how to use good gear, and then produce something really eye-opening, really different, really individual, something that says something about who you are and what you want to say, and then get it in front of people. Because every social media platform, if you post, it will just send it out to a couple hundred people to see if they respond. And if they do, it'll send it out to a couple thousand people. And if they do, a couple 100,000 people. It is no better time to launch yourself from anonymity and build, to find your people in the stories that you want to tell. So instead of waiting for that big break, instead of trying to win that lottery, dedicate yourself to doing the best you can with what you have right now. Because over time, that really is what makes the big difference. That really is the path, the foolproof path to success. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.